was still writing the book, but I have not heard from her since I wrote it. A person that I know who is in touch with her told me that he read her section out loud to her over the phone because I guess she couldn't receive a copy of it because of rules about, I don't quite understand why, but what did he say? He said she surprisingly didn't hate it. So I take that as a compliment.
Very good.
Well, this book included 4 true stories of women driven by obsession. What are some others that almost made the cut?
If I had had another 6 months, I think it would have been really fascinating to include a story about Anne Rule, the very prolific, deceased crime writer. I think she's just a fascinating figure. She was a true crime writer who had been writing for these kind of low-level magazines, kind of pulpy magazines, and then had this big break when it turns out that she knew Ted Bundy and really built a career off of that. But she was a true crime writer before that. Among the archetypes that I discuss, the idea of also talking about the writer, the true crime writer, maybe that would have been a little too meta. I don't know. But and I would have just been interested to learn more about her. So
yeah, what are the odds of that a true crime writer knew a serial killer?
Well, didn't they work on a suicide hotline together?
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's kind of wow. Do you think in the time of Frances Glessner Lee, women were as obsessed with true crime as they are today?
It's interesting. I'm no historian, so I don't want to state more than I know. But Frances Glessner Lee, who was born in the 1980s and became really fascinated by and sort of self-educated in the field of forensic science, which was then really new, was super fascinated by crime and the science side of crime and crime solving. And I think it was seen as unusual at the time. If you're reading about these big famous cases like Lizzie Borden's trial, a ton of women attended her trial, or Jack the Ripper, women were like obsessed with the case of Jack the Ripper.
Bonnie and Clyde was
totally. Yeah, that's exactly. And I think in some ways we still have like a kind of limited idea of what women could be interested in, what women's minds are like. And the idea there still are these sexist ideas that stories of violence, like, oh, that's not for women. Women aren't interested in that. I think the historical record, really makes it clear that that's not true. But it was always seen as this thing that was kind of unladylike, kind of unseemly, not what you were supposed to be interested in. When you think about cases like Lizzie Borden, who was, maybe possibly murdered her abusive parents, or Jack the Ripper, who was killing poor women, possibly sex workers. Of course, women would be interested in those stories because they're ways to kind of talk about these parts of life, like abuse and sex work and violence against women that were particularly in that era, like super taboo. You couldn't kind of have public conversations about them. And I think often our attraction to these crime stories are because they are a way of talking about some of the dark realities of life, particularly of women's lives, that don't get focused on elsewhere. And so, of course, women were attending those trials and following those cases and fascinated by them. But usually when you hear people, particularly at the time, talking about the women attending Lizzie Borden's trial, it's with this very kind of scolding tone, like, these women are interested in this story, like how tacky. But, maybe they just wanted a forum to kind of talk about and think about abuse within or something. So I think it is an interest that is long-standing, and the true crime boom that we're seeing now is maybe partially just because these things that were considered taboo are less taboo now.
Well, we have actually had the pleasure of seeing the Nutshell galleries twice now.
Cool. In DC?
Well, once in D.C., and then we actually attended a talk about them, but he was the overseer of them.
Oh, Bruce Goldfarb.
Yes. So he was like, do you guys want to see them? So we got a kind of a private showing.
That's amazing.
For a small group. It was awesome.
That's great. He has a book coming out February, I think, that's about Frances Glessner Lee. It has a lot more detail, and it's really fascinating.
Oh, yes, we did hear about that.
Now, what was the most surprising fact that you learned while researching Savage Appetite?
I learned so much working on this book. One thing that really stuck in my head was these surveys that Pew has done over the past several decades about violence and people's perception of violence and how the violent crime rate in the United States, what the trend is over decades, almost uniformly is that the crime rate has been going like really on a strong downward trend since I think 92 was maybe the peak of violent crime in the US recently. So it's just every year violent crime is declining. It's half of what it was back then. But when Pew asks people, do you feel like crime is going up or down where you live? People almost always say that it's going up. And so even as crime is declining, our perception of how safe the world is getting worse. We're feeling less safe in the world, like the world is a more violent place, even when it's becoming less violent. And I think you can certainly chalk some of that up to our media culture. So many stories of just terrible things all the time. And so our sense of how violent our country is has gotten really distorted.
I read this study that this guy did, that he went to this small town back in the 70s and asked if he could kind of watch their children and see how they play. And then he did it again, like in the early 2000s, and there were no kids playing. His focus of study ended up changing because he realized that it was the parents being afraid that wouldn't allow their kids out to play, but he showed them the crime statistics actually went down. Your kids are safer now than they were in the 70s.
Right. But parents who let their kids play on playgrounds, like sometimes the parents get arrested for that, for the kids playing.
That's stupid.
It is stupid. It is stupid.
Well, Rachel, we really appreciate you taking time to speak with us. Do you have any new books or events coming up that you would like our listeners to know about?
You know, at the moment, I am blissfully done with my book tour, which was really fun, but it's nice to be back home. I have some magazine pieces coming out in the new year, some of them crime-related, some of them not. So people can check out my website, rachel-monroe.com, or my Twitter feed, which is Rach Monroe, to read more.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that information. We'll include it in our show notes also for people to find you.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking with you all this morning.
Well, Rachel, we will wrap this up now. Please keep us posted if you do have anything new coming out so we can promote it on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me to do this.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. I found this book very well written, but troubling. I guess I'm not a person who becomes that buried in a certain subject.
Well, I would hope you don't identify with any of these people. I just found it fascinating that there are people out there that are willing to pretty much throw their lives away to pursue something so macabre. It blew my mind away.
Frances Glessner Lee subject, nutshell crime series were fascinating, and we were lucky enough to get to see those in person 2 years ago, I guess it was.
I thought it was very interesting that Rachel included her in this book because until this book came out, I really didn't look at it that Frances had an obsession, but I guess she really did. I mean, the detail that this woman put in these dioramas was just amazing.
It was fascinating. The whole book was fascinating. The one story that bothered me the most, though, was the last one, where the young girl became so obsessed with the Columbine killers that she planned to execute her own murderous attack on innocent people. The consequences that she paid for that, which were surprising to me.
Yeah, they really were to me too. But apparently it's a phenomenon as far as women wanting to marry serial killers. I mean, look at Ted Bundy, look at Charles Manson. They had groupies.
Oh, yes. And even in my own life, when my son was very small and I had to go to work, his babysitter was a groupie, if you want to call it that, for a murderer that was on death row in the state of Maryland. And she went to visit him every week, and she wrote him letters. And I often wondered what happened.
You let her watch your son?
Well, I didn't know it until... And back then, I was a little desperate to have a babysitter. Maybe that's what's wrong with Billy today.
Well, he does. He is a little obsessed with...
yes, maybe she taught him things that I...
With horror movies and
yes,
the likes of such. But I thank Rachel for writing this book. I really enjoyed the fact that this is a complete 180 of true crime. Instead of focusing on the person committing the crime, these are people that are a direct result of the crime, but not victims. So I thought it was fascinating that she chose these 4 stories to write about, and I would love to see her do a book too.
Yeah, you just wonder what else is out there. It's scary in today's world. The things that can come up on the internet, the so-called dark net.
So if you enjoy true crime, definitely go check out Savage Appetite. It's currently available everywhere.
You will enjoy it. Now we have our up-and-coming list of books that are just out or are coming out in the very near future.
The first one up is Long Bright River by Liz Moore. It looks like it's a standalone, so that came out on January 7th.
The book Many Rivers to Cross by Peter Robinson is book number 26 of one of my favorites, the DCI Banks series, and that came out January 14th.
And then we have The Hand on the Wall by Maureen Johnson. This is a young adult mystery, and it's her 3rd and final installment in the Truly Devious series. Go check out all these authors. Like, go to your local bookstore and snatch them up. And then we need to give you the answer to last week's trivia question. And the question was,
which of Agatha Christie's novels was written from the viewpoint of the killer? Answers are A, Murder on the Orient Express, B, Murder on the Blue Train, C, The Pale Horse, or D, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And the answer is
D, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. So congratulations to all of our listeners who got that answer right. So now we'll move on to this week's question. How many Sherlock Holmes novels did Conan Doyle write?
A, 1.
B, 8.
C, 4.
Or D, 11. Tune in next week for your answers.
Well, please visit our website. You can sign up for our newsletter. Before we go any further, we want to take a moment to thank our new patron, Liz D. We are just thrilled. We know her personally, and we welcome her to the Dark and Stormy family.
She happens to own the local bookstore here in Bel Air, Maryland. We just love her and her store. We thank her, and hugs, hugs, hugs to her.
And if anybody's in the Bel Air area, look up Caprico Books.
Yes. You don't even have to be in this area. Come, and if you're passing through, or if you're in Baltimore, it's worth a trip.
Yes, it's a cozy little store. She has a little bit of something for everyone. You could spend all day there.
Yes, and the thing I really like about her store is she really supports artists in the area. If you have something that you make, and especially if it has to do with literature, she's going to put it in her store. That's why she helps support us, because we are a local artist.
We are.
Of the podcast sort.
Yes.
And if you would like to join Liz in becoming one of our patrons, you can check us out, patreon.com/darkandstormybc.
If you have any suggestions for the program or comments, we'd love to hear from you at darkandstormybookclub@gmail.com. Remember, we're still looking for short story submissions for our newsletter. The first story came out this week. We are thrilled, and it was written by Stephen Levi, and be sure and check that out. It was a very good story, and we'd like to put yours in there too. You don't have to be a published author. Make this your first publication.
If you were looking to dabble
away.
Dabble with us.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of another episode. We thank you for listening. Please join us next time. And remember,
life would be boring without a little mystery.
Bye.